Before the Ranger Creed is recited by a formation of Rangers at any ceremony, you will always hear the narrator say this. Will all Rangers past and present please join us as we recite the Ranger Creed? Every Ranger will stand, and as they say those six stanzas, they are transformed back to a time when they had the pleasure and the burden of this brotherhood. That feeling is hard to describe. However, it's one that never leaves you. It's a connection that spans the globe and can be reignited when you hear the phrase, "Hey, Ranger, what battalion you from?" Amongst this formation, there are Rangers that stand out. They are legends of this elite organization, and when their names are spoken, people instantly have a story and for a moment relive it. Legends of the 75th podcast wants to capture that feeling and those stories. We want to ensure that these legends' triumphs and sacrifices never fade away. So sit back with your favorite adult beverage and listen to stories from the legends of the 75th. All right. Hey, welcome everybody back to another episode of Legends of the 75th. I'm pretty excited to sit down with everybody today. And I just want to give a special shout out and a special thank you to all of our Patreon members and everybody that's supporting the community. We are doing a lot of amazing things and a lot of amazing work to capture Ranger history. And that's actually what part of the reason I wanted to sit down with our guest is to kind of talk about this, that he was the fuel that ignited kind of where Legends of the 75th is going to go in the future and some of the things that we're going to be able to do. So I have the absolute distinct pleasure of introducing and bringing on the podcast tonight, Lieutenant Colonel retired Dan Knight. So if you don't know who Dan is, Dan served in 375, 275. He also served within 20th Special Forces Group and 1st Special Forces Group. He did over 30 years in the Army. He did a little bit of time in the 82nd Airborne, 11 combat deployments. He was injured twice in combat, and he's also done some of the other advisory work since retirement, helping in conflicts, help with medical training and stuff like that across the globe. And he's currently also the spiritual advisor for Three Rangers Foundation. Dan has probably one of the most ridiculous careers of any officer I've ever heard. I'm very excited. He actually sent me like kind of, a soup to nuts of all those things that he's done in his career, and I've never heard of an officer doing some of the stuff that he's done. So we'll dive in. We'll deep dive into this, but then also as we get into the episode, we're also going to talk a little bit about Operation Cabanatuan, how that came about, and the amazing thing that we did now like about a month ago over in the Philippines. So anyway, enough of me. Dan, absolute honor to have you on the podcast tonight. How you doing, Ranger buddy?
Doing great, brother. It's it's a little intimidating for me. As you know, many of the conversations we had, I'm an alumni of the 75th, not a legend of the 75th. So it's an honor to be here. I've been kind of reluctant to take part, but I appreciate you continue to challenge me, not to tell my story, but to tell the story of the Ranger NCOs who shaped me and molded me and just made me a better man, husband, father, and warrior. And really to tell the story about Cabanatuan, it's something that I wanted to do for a long time. To pay homage and respect to the guys who went before, and I certainly feel like we did that. And you were absolutely instrumental in that realm. That's kind of a story of my whole career. I have an idea, share it with a couple of Ranger NCOs, and they make it happen. It's amazing to still be able to see that after 35 or so years of being in this community. And just, man, am I blessed every day that I wake up and draw breath and I'm able to call brothers like you and pitch wild ideas and things and just watch them take off.
Yeah, I can actually remember when you where we first connected and you kind of told me what you were thinking. I was actually waiting for my daughter to get out of CAP, Civil Air Patrol. So I was waiting for her. I remember the parking lot, and you told me, and I was like, there's a lot of things to like figure out, but the answer is yes, and it's going to be awesome. And then it just kind of flourished from there, and it developed from there. So, but we'll get into that. We'll get into that. We'll dive into that definitely some more. But I'd love for you to just, kind of let's just, kind of cover your career. kind of soup to nuts here, in kind of the first part of the episode. You started in ROTC, and one of the things that you told me was immediately upon being involved in the ROTC program, Ranger NCOs had an impact, had an influence, and started shaping you like right off the rip.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, it's going to be hard for me to call some names because doing that,
That's okay.
I'm going to skip over some,
Yeah.
and that's inadvertent, and it's not because they weren't instrumental. But yeah, I got into ROTC at the University of Southern Mississippi, and just right off the bat, two Ranger NCOs, and both those guys were fairly senior then, a senior sergeant first class and a master sergeant. Both of them had served in the early Ranger companies even before Abrams Charter became kind of a thing. And those guys just really began shaping me and molding me and helping me understand, Ranger standards, even before I got into the Army. I was blessed, did pretty well in ROTC, was able to, get my branch of choice. And so I showed up over to Fort Benning in 1989. Did pretty well in the basic course. Of course, went straight into Ranger school. I was already, airborne qualified, so I went straight into Ranger school. And as soon as I got there, man, I was in Charlie Company. The Army was just jamming guys through Ranger school, in the late 80s. And so I think my class, it was astronomical, started with like 300 dudes in Ranger school or whatever. Just right off the bat, I kind of migrated into a group of young bat boys, young privates and PFCs.
When you were in Ranger school, you did. Okay.
Yeah, when I was in Ranger school, and those guys, I don't know if they saw something in me or just said, hey, maybe this guy knows a little bit more about the op order process than we do. So, we'll take care of him. He'll take care of us. And that's really kind of how it worked. I think I had 12 or 13 guys in my squad. 3 of us went straight through, and it was a Ranger from 175 named Wagner and a Ranger from 275 named Robinson. And I think we were the only 3, to kind of like go straight through together.
Right.
And then shortly after that, I graduated, and I don't know if they still have this, or some people may recognize the term, but there's a thing called Blackbird status, and you just kind of hanging out waiting on you. Yeah, well, I think they use it maybe just for officers or whatever at Fort Benning. Okay. But anyway, I had follow-on orders to a couple schools. I was going to go to the Long Range Surveillance Leaders course, and I was supposed to go to the Infantry Mortar Platoon Leader course, MPOC.
Yeah.
And so I had a little bit of time to kill before those courses started up. But anyway, in Ranger school, I had kind of made a connection with an RI as much as you can in Ranger school. And the guy's name, he's a true legend of the 75th. He's a guy that you should be talking to, named Joe Ulibarri.
Yeah.
Of course, Joe had a combat scroll from 275 Grenada, and that was the only show in town then. So I mean, I was really, really looked up to that guy. He was one of my RIs, and I remember distinctly him grading me on a patrol and saying, "Hey, you did a good job, Ranger," kind of thing. So that was cool. And then so shortly after Ranger school, I was waiting to go to these other schools, and IOBC basically said, "Hey, find a job," and so I ended up working out at the RTB for a little while, waiting to go to schools, and just worked around some great NCOs out there. I mean, I know a lot of times guys especially guys, kind of maybe talk a little trash on the RTB, but I had good experiences there. I worked there more than once. And so anyway, kind of reconnected with then Sergeant First Class Ulibarri as when I was out there working in Blackbird status. And shortly after that, he returned to the regiment, and he told me, and he went and took RRD. Then it wasn't RRC; it was the old Regimental Recon Detachment. But he was going back over there to take Team 1, and he kind of planted a seed. It's like, hey man, you're a pretty good officer. You're as good as it gets. From for a second lieutenant. But he said, you ought to consider going to the Ranger Regiment. And I just say that kind of planted a seed. I mean, I don't know what he saw in me or whatever, but anyway. So fast forward a couple months, I'm in the long range surveillance leaders course, and lo and behold, Sergeant First Class Joe Ulibarri and two of his young E5s, I think they were then, Lowell McGee and Tracy Jenkins show up. And I'm in the course with them, in the long range surveillance leaders course with those guys. And they, just right off the bat, they're like, hey, we'll take you as our officer, because there's like one officer on every team or whatever. And it was stressful, man, because you had organized PT the way they ran that course then, and it went from like 6 to 7 or maybe 7:30, and then Joe Ulibarri's standard was, hey, we'll do PT until about 8:30, and then we'll be in class at 9. So I still had all my post Ranger school fat on me, and and he broke it off in me pretty good. They did as a team, and those guys are all just back from combat deployment in Panama, and because all this, the Panama deployment happened in those intervening months when I was waiting to go to the long range surveillance leaders course.
Okay.
Anyway, they were fresh back from combat, and Ulibarri, he was just one of my heroes, man, and I just remember thinking, hey, if that Ranger regiment is made up of NCOs like these three dudes right here, then that's the Army I want to be in, and so I really just made it my goal that I'm gonna somehow get to that 75th Ranger Regiment. And so fast forward a couple more months, I end up assigned to the 197th, deployed almost immediately to Desert Shield, Desert Storm, where the 197th became the 3rd Brigade of the 24th ID, not officially, but kind of on paper for that Desert Shield, Desert Storm deployment. So, so I spent 8 or 9 months deployed and got back, and then, quickly started trying to jump through the hoops and put together a packet and figure out how I could get to the Ranger Regiment. 3rd Battalion worked out, because it was basically a cross post transfer, and, went over and interviewed and kind of started my career then in 3rd Ranger Battalion as a what was then known as a weapons platoon leader.
Right.
Before they formed they used to have, well, most of the guys who are watching this will probably know, but anyway, there were 3 rifle platoons and then weapons platoon in each one of the 3 line companies at that point in time. So, so started off in, there, and just right off the bat, once again, the quality of soldiers was, was just amazing. I mean, Ranger NCOs and Ranger, Rangers just in general. And I knew that was going to be the case. I mean, it wasn't a surprise.
Right.
Even some of my best soldiers in the 197th were guys who had been RFS'd from, from 375.
Yeah. Right.
And so, it wasn't a shock. It just wasn't a shock. I mean, I knew the quality. I knew that it was, physically I had been, real close to the top of my platoon. And then, I kind of signed into 375, and I go to being like middle of the pack kind of guy. And so it was, so it was challenging, man. Physically it was challenging, mentally it was challenging, but man, it was awesome. It was absolutely, what I signed up to do in the Army. And man, I loved every minute of it.
Yeah, that's amazing. So 375, then you went to 5th RTB. You did some time walking and doing patrols there at 5th RTB. And then you actually got an opportunity in 93 to compete in the Best Ranger competition, which you placed 3rd in, which is not bad.
Yeah. That was just kind of a fluke thing as well. After my time in 375, when I went to, back in the day, there was just, an officer just wouldn't even dream of asking to compete in Best Ranger. That just, wasn't a thing.
Okay.
But guys would often, when they went to the advanced course, they would, they would compete from the advanced course. I think that still happens, quite honestly. I think guys are still able to do that.
Yeah, they are.
So me and one of my buddies from 375 were in the advanced course together, named Mark Kirby. We competed, as when we were in the advanced course, and we finished. That's all I can really say. Is
Well,
we finished.
that's a big deal. That's a big accomplishment right
Yeah,
there.
but yeah, it was cool. I mean, it was great because I got to meet some great guys, and that competition is really fun. It really is. I mean, it's arduous, but it's fun. And so that year I met James Pippin. He was competing that year, and I met Joey Fink and Joe Clark and just a bunch of other true legends of the 75th, and that was a cool thing about it. But yeah, so then the next year when I was up at the RTB, it wasn't actually verboten, to try. So I talked to my battalion commander, who was an old 175 guy, Luke Green. It's like, hey, sir, I finished Best Ranger last year, but we didn't really get any time to train and hone skills and things like that, and I'd like to give it a shot while I'm up here. And he said, all right, you can do it, but you're not going to SD or anything. So we didn't get the true chance to to take a couple months off, but RTB provided an opportunity, kind of arrange the schedule so that my partner he's a Ranger Hall of Fame member as well. First Sergeant Major, retired Art McCann. He was first sergeant then. And yeah, we competed, and that was a year Strucker and Gamazel won it. And Jeff Strucker had been an old buddy from 375. So it was, it was just great. It was a good opportunity. It was it's still special to me. I still go over to Best Ranger almost every year.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. Well, it's coming up. It's coming up that time of year again.
Yep. I'll always see some old Ranger buddies over there. Looking forward to it.
Well, and then you got the opportunity to go up to the battalion, 275 as well.
Yes, I did. That too was a blessing. Probably didn't hurt. I had done a decent job, I think, in 375. And my old company commander, General Mike Garrett, he would have been my company commander in ACO 375 when I was weapons PL and the 1st Platoon Glory Boys PL. And so anyway, he was out there as the S3, and I think he convinced him to take a chance on me, so I was able to go out to 275, and was really looking forward. Had a blast out there, loved it.
Yeah.
And anybody who's ever been in 275 will tell you that they loved it, and I did. I loved every minute of being out there, and it was kind of tough to leave, but it was the right thing for me to do.
Yeah. Well, and from there, that's when you decided to actually change. Well, one, get into the National Guard, and then go into the Chaplain Corps as well. And before we kind of pivot here, I would what was the decision behind deciding to go over to the Chaplain Corps?
Yeah, and this one is this was tough. This is not something that I did lightly or unadvisedly or half-heartedly. So for at that point, I had been a commissioned officer, had been in the Army for about 7 years, maybe 8. I don't remember exactly. 7 or 8. Anyway, and I was doing well. I was gonna probably continue to do really well, but it had been at the expense of my family, Mike, and
right.
I'd kind of made the Army my God, and everything I did was Army, with very little thought to to how it was going to affect or impact my wife, my kids, etc. And even off duty, I was only half there, and my wife kind of had noticed that, and she really kind of called me out on it. And she said, I remember one time we got back from a deployment. I don't remember where it was, but maybe Hunter Liggett or something. Anyway, 275 had done a DFT, and as soon as we got a deployment for training for the new guys, I don't know if they still call them that, but anyway, we gone, I think, to Hunter Liggett, and we got back, and I was going to go skydive with some guys from the S3 shop, and
right.
And I remember looking at it, we're going to go out to Kapowson and jump, beautiful drop zone. I need to get out there and jump again. But anyway, I digress. She said, "Hey, you can go jump if you want. I've been gone 2 or 3 weeks." And she said, "Hey, you can go jump if you want, but when you get back, me and the kids are going to be gone." And man, it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks. And I was a Christian, but not a very good one. And I hadn't really, done what I needed to do as a husband and a father. I'd been a great soldier, a good ranger, I was a good officer, but I just wasn't very good at anything else. And so a friend of mine had given me a book called Tender Warrior, written by a fellow airborne ranger.
Yeah.
Anyway, I started reading that book, and I really started praying. And I went to see my chaplain, my battalion chaplain, 275 at that time, was a guy named Mark Gauthier, and just a fantastic chaplain. He had been a prior service infantry officer as well. And I went and told him, I said, "Hey, Mark, this is what's going on." And I remember him asking me, he said, "Hey, Dan, are you a Christian?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "I really wouldn't have known it by the way you carry and conduct yourself." And man, that hurt, that hurt,
Yeah.
that cut
Wow.
me, deep, as it should. It was intended to. I mean, God intended that to kind of be the two before that busted me over the head that I needed to get back on track. And so I remember that night I read through that book, Tender Warrior, by a guy named Stu Weber. And really, for the first time in a long time, I spent a lot of time praying. And my wife is a fantastic Christian gal, and had been, and she had been praying for me. And I didn't go skydiving to make this long story short.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But I spent some time in prayer and really thinking about it. And then the next day I went to see the chaplain and Mark Gauthier. And when I got back home, I told Gay, I said, "You're a fine Christian woman. You always have been." I said, "I have not been the husband, the father that you guys need. And I'm going to fix that." And I told her then, I said, "I'll figure this out if you'll give me a second chance." And she did. And so it wasn't instantaneous, but I really began to be discipled by Chaplain Mark Gauthier. And then soon into this, he PCS'd. And he was replaced by a guy named Terry McBride, who was just another fantastic Ranger chaplain.
Fantastic. Yep.
Yeah. Just on fire for the Lord. And so anyway, those two guys really began to disciple me. And the more I thought about it and prayed about it, and I got tied into a local church there out in Graham. We lived out Eastgate in Graham, Washington.
Oh, okay. All right. Yeah, I lived out there too. Yeah.
Yeah, it was fantastic, and so we got tied into a local church out there, and really, I think the Lord just kind of started to make clear. It's like, "Hey, man, you're not gonna command a Ranger company. That's not the plan I have for you." And that was tough, man, because I still wanted to be a Ranger Rifle commander, man. And so anyway, it all just kind of worked out, and I said, "Well, God, if that's what you want me to do, I'm going to do it." And because I made, I kind of made the deal with you, not that it works exactly like that, but I kind of told God, if you give me a second chance with my wife, I'm going to follow you and I'm going to live for you. And and life from now on it's going to include Jesus. Jesus is not going to be an afterthought.
Okay. All right. Hey, everybody. Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you want to hear the rest of the story of Lieutenant Colonel retired Dan Knight, hey, please become a Patreon member, exclusive member, and then you can have access to not only the rest of this episode, but then also, the 60 plus other episodes, some of the behind scene footage that we've done for Cabanaton. We're going to have exclusive trailers that are going to be released as well for that. So highly encourage you to go and become an exclusive member so that you can get all of the greatness and all the episodes and everything else that we're doing with the community on the Patreon page.